So glad to be here with you. I want to talk to you about shame. And what's really interesting is I wanted to sit down and do this recording. I actually have sat down and attempted this recording. I've had this exact intro a couple different times. And it's just such a heavy subject. It's hard, especially sitting here in front of a camera, kind of talking to myself about it. Versus when I'm talking with a client, there's this interactive, you're not alone in this information. So I just want to acknowledge that out of the gate, that it's even hard to speak kind of openly and I guess directly at shame. But I've been having a lot of people bringing up shame in my sessions, in my work, in my life. And so I do think it's definitely time to have this conversation. So let's go on this journey. Grab some tea, water, blankets, socks, whatever, and let's walk this path together. So the first thing I like to distinguish for people with shame is that we usually pair this with guilt. So guilt is about what we have or have not done. It's about how we feel about our behaviors, maybe even some of our thoughts. And shame kind of comes directly at us as it's about who we are. It's about our character. It's about our enoughness, our belonging. So even just there, the shift, the paradigm shift that I try to work with people is if we can take all of the things that you're holding shame about and try and paradigm shift it to guilt. I feel guilty about what I said, did, how I behaved, how I froze, how I didn't act, what I didn't say. So that's kind of the first remedy, right? Great. If we can get there, awesome. For a lot of people, though, the journey of even getting there or being able to even touch into shame is a process, like everything, but it can take a while to get there. So I like to start with where are we going, and if you can get there, great. The thing is we may also be able to get there about certain things, and then other things we're still holding shame. It's not a one-size-fits-all, as nothing is. So even if you can do that about certain things, you might be still holding shame about other things. And that may actually make you feel more confused, because why can't I just shift this over to guilt? Brene Brown has an excellent TED Talk on shame. I will link it down in the bottom. She has been one of the leading research experts and has talked directly about shame. And one of the things that really stands out to me in her TED Talk is she talks about this idea of a petri dish. That if we took a petri dish and put two petri dishes side by side, put the same exact amount of shame in each petri dish. If we take petri dish number 1 and we douse that with secrecy, silence, and judgment, shame grows exponentially. It takes over that petri dish. If in the second petri dish, we actually douse that same amount of shame that we had to begin with in the first one with empathy, compassion, and exposure. So not holding it alone, putting it somewhere that's safe out in the world to be witnessed, it can shrink. So this is sort of the process and the path. Sometimes when I even just bring this up with clients, the only thing they take away from that is, you want me to tell everyone about my shame? Right. And you don't have to tell everyone. You don't have to tell anyone in this moment. It's just the idea. So let's just take a mindful moment here. Take a beat and check in with this information so far. How are you feeling? What are the thoughts? Is anything challenging you? Just take a few breaths with that. maybe take some notes. This is the benefit of having this as a YouTube. Pause, check in. So we're gonna move forward. If you need more minutes, take those minutes. I think the other thing that I have been on my own journey around shame that's really helped me is internal family systems. So internal family systems, again, I'll put a link in the bottom. Dr. Richard Schwartz is the founder of the IFS Institute and has the book No Bad Parts, which I recommend to everyone. So I really subscribe to the idea that there are no bad parts. And that's just through my own work and the work that I've done with my clients. That doesn't mean that we're comfortable with all of our parts. That doesn't mean that all of our parts are maybe functioning the way they're supposed to. But what really makes me curious around shame is that you come to understand that these parts are burdened and they might not be functioning the way they're intended to function. And through those burdens and through maybe even protecting or managing things, they kind of act according to their own survival mechanisms inside of us. So this made me very curious about shame. And when I got to this place inside of myself, and I thought, so if this isn't a bad part, if this is just a misunderstood, misrepresented part of myself, how do I get to know that better? Because it's so difficult to sit with or tap into. And there's a lot of other parts inside of me, and a lot of the times when I talk with clients, that are attached to that. It makes it hard to really even get to the core of shame itself and deal with that part, talk with that part. So I probably am not the first person to do this, but it's one of those collective conscious moments. Like, this came to me in a meditation. If somebody has already created that, I apologize. This came from my own origins. So I am going to actually link this as a separate meditation, but I'm going to just go through this visualization process. So you can either do this now, you can come back to this video, or I'm just gonna cut a segment of this part and put it in its own video so you can just use this visualization. So the visualization is getting comfortable, checking in. We're gonna work with visualizing shame. So just trying to find some points of support and grounding first. Taking some breaths. And I want you to start to visually manifest. What does your shame look like? What color is it? Is there a texture to it? Is it invisible? And then if so, how can you sense it? Does it have any other qualities? Is there an animal or maybe even a tree or something in nature, a rock that it represents? And start to visualize how close or far away you want this object or entity as you're starting to kind of physically form your shame. And it could change colors, right? But I just want you to really start to get a sense of there's a form to this shame and what that looks like for you. And then again, how far away, how close do you want this? And really deciding when we're done with this visualization, where do you want this shame to reside? We can't just banish it. So we're going to create a container. And depending on the size, if your shame is, very, very small, then maybe there's a smaller container. If it's really, really big as a mountain, maybe we have to create like a sphere around it. So really kind of thinking about the size of your shame and what a safe container for this shame looks like. And I want you to think about poking a hole, a little tiny pinhole inside of a piece of paper. And that amount of light, any color light, it can be rainbow light, it can be yellow, blue, golden, green, whatever you want, crystal clear. I want you to send this entity that you have created around your shame that pinhole of light. You're not taking anything away from yourself. This is coming from a natural abundance of care and love. And I want you to just let that shame know, hey, I see you. I see your form. And I want to work on this. And you might get a message back. You don't have to. You don't have to receive that message right now. You're just being curious and just starting to form this dialogue. So each time you come back to this visualization, you're going to visualize the form that your shame takes. You're going to visualize then the container in which you can ask that shame to contain itself in. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it becomes too much. If you need to, kind of consolidate and move on to something else. And then I want you, to whatever extent you feel comfortable, create this hole. And over time, the idea is that maybe that hole can go a little bit bigger, goes from a little bitty pin to maybe a pen or pencil size hole. And then maybe eventually you don't need the paper. And that you're starting a dialogue with your shame. Not at your shame, not about your shame, with it. So we're going to now close out this visualization by asking your shame to enter into the container. Again, we're creating a lot of space around this. It's not shoving it into a little bitty shoebox if it's too big for that. And we're going to thank it. And any other closing, breaths, statements. And come back into your space. Check in with your bottom, your toes, your fingers. Maybe do some journaling. So now that we've walked through that visualization, I want to share some insights about my own journey with this visualization, with this idea that shame does not have to be a bad part of us. It's not a bad part of us. It's a very misunderstood part. And when I did a little exploring, because this really challenged me, it's like, wow, I've never really truly believed that there is any quantifiable reason that could be a good reason to have shame. And people make the argument of like, well, shame, make sure that we don't get out of line. Shame is a collective tool. I just never subscribed to that. If that's your subscription, that's fine. I never subscribed to that. I always felt like, no, there's guilt can be productive. Shame's never felt productive for me, especially collective shame or public shaming. Doesn't seem effective. And so I sat with this and I realized, shame's purpose, this part that we call shame, its purpose is to keep us safe. And specifically, it keeps us safe by creating a feeling that if we stay small, if we stay invisible, if we don't expose ourselves, right? Remember that petri dish, like shame can't exist in exposure. So of course it's gonna be like, don't tell anyone about this. No one will love you if they know this about you. Its job is to keep you small and unseen, because that's where safety resides. So when we think about parts, whatever part is driving a thought, feeling, sensation, action, it's coming from a protective place. I think one of the other things that I find really curious is Julia Cameron's The Artist Way. She doesn't talk about shame necessarily, but she did have this line, the section in there about the critic. And rethinking shame and reading what Julia Cameron has talked about in regards to the inner critic, I really think of it differently. And this is how I think of it. So maybe this can help you. First of all, the critic gets a really bad rap. I think of however you want to think about it, wherever the first people for you come from, that's fine. Just think of, in your mind, the first people. And the first people hanging out in the safety of their cave at night. And they've never left the cave at night because it's not safe. There's all these sounds you can't see. And there's this, for me, it's a young teenage girl. You can identify as who you are. But this young teenage girl walks to the edge of that cave and says, but I wonder what is out there. I imagine all of this beauty and the stars swirling, and I want to see it. I want to go out there. And the critic comes in and says, you can't do that. No one's ever done that. How do you know you'll be safe? How do you know that that's what's out there? What if there's just a tiger waiting right outside the door ready to pounce on you and eat you? Now I want to pause here. The critic's not saying, do not go out there. The critic is just saying, how do you know? Can we be safe? Is this okay? Have you thought this through? Having a critic has been necessity in human development. It's the difference between when shame climbs in the back seat with that critic, and then it's, how do you know? Because you're too stupid to figure it out. I'm going to keep you small. I'm going to keep you afraid so that you can't ever leave this cave. So again, kind of pausing, looking at that story. What are some aspects or thoughts, feelings, challenges that have come up for you? Take a few deep breaths. Pause if you want to write, journal. I have worked with my shame now for a good amount of time, and I will continue working with it. Our parts don't get healed and, fade into some distance. They become integrated. They become, more known and cooperative, possibly with us. But they're still there. We still have to work with them and continue to collaborate. So as I've witnessed, though, what's really interesting is in my visualization, my shame was this big, like, blackish, blue, just giant, kind of swamp monster thing, and it had like this oily, like almost oil goo kind of texture, and it was really just like formless. It was just kind of like gloppity glook. And as I have worked with it, it's still that same texture, which is in color, which is very interesting to me, and it actually has a little bit more of a human form. And so I believe that by witnessing and talking more directly with and helping my shame have its own container and being able to understand when I'm in it, when I'm there in the shame is really taking over, really kind of protecting in its own way, being able to understand and resonate. And no one's perfect. I mean, you're gonna have moments still, it catches up with you, you didn't realize it, you kind of have to backtrack and understand. So there's no perfection. And if you listen to Brene Brown's vulnerability and shame talk, or you read Daring Greatly, you will understand that perfection is actually a way that we shield ourselves from shame. It all kind of goes together. And when we can touch into that shame, when we can do that visualization or find our own way of communicating more directly with that part and understanding the function of that part, we have a much better chance of being in a collaborative relationship, an integrative relationship with the more difficult parts of ourselves that we find more difficult. And really being able to navigate all of that much easier. So I think there's a lot of good information out there about shame. I think that this is probably a different approach to it than a lot of approaches. So I'd be interested to hear from you, especially if you do the visualization or if you've been on your own journey of understanding anything about shame. I appreciate you being here. I finally got through it. Yay! That is a worthy celebration because this has been a long time coming. So I also just am grateful for the conversations that I've had with the people I work with that have kind of reminded me and led me back to, yeah, this is actually an important thing to talk about. So I hope that you take a lot of good care of yourself. I hope you do well on your journey, and I will see you around.